Okay, guys, we are now. War is imminent. We are going to battle. Uh, make sure that you access the Civil War notes. You're going to be referencing those often. If something you can't find for to answer some of these slides, make sure that you get that from the notes. Just click here. You can see the date again one more time correlates with the secession of the United States and then also the reconstruction of building it back together after the Civil War ended in 1865. Okay, comparing the Union and the Confederacy real quick. If you go to your notes on this side right here, comparing the North and the South, I believe there is a slide right here, slide 15 and slide 16. A couple things about them. Number one, the North had about 22 million people. Compared to the South, they only had about 9 million people, and 3.5 million of them were slaves. So they had a lot more people in the North. The North had 85% of the factories making things, manufacturing things from raw materials, guns, ammunition. A lot of those things came from the North. The North had almost double the railroad. That's a supply chain advantage because you can get supplies and men quicker to where they need to be around the country because of the railroad system. The North had almost all the naval power. Yes, there were actually battles on sea during the Civil War. A couple other things you need to note. No, some of their weaknesses is that they didn't have strong leaders. I may even add that they didn't have a lot of strong leaders in the North. Lincoln tried to get Robert E. Lee on his side, but however, his Robert E. Lee felt as though he should side with the South as a result of family alliances, and so he stayed with the South and left the North. But that was kind of odd because Ulysses S. Grant and Robert E. Lee both fought together for the Union, for the federal government in the U.S.-Mexican War, and Robert E. Lee was the arresting officer at Harper's Ferry with John Brown situation. But he left the North, left his alliances with Lincoln, and fought for the South. And here's another crazy thing: he never owned slaves. Robert E. Lee never owned a slave. However, Ulysses S. Grant did own slaves. Kind of weird. Ulysses S. Grant, who was the general for the North, owned slaves, fought against slavery. Robert E. Lee fought for slavery but never owned a slave. Kind of a very weird fact about those two gentlemen. The South, a couple things. Oh, one more thing about the North. The weakness. They didn't know the way of the land. A lot of the fighting was in the areas of rebellion in the South. So just keep that in mind. They often got lost. In the South, South strengths and weaknesses. Number one, the Confederacy had better leaders. They had Robert E. Lee. They had Stonewall Jackson. They had a lot of great leaders in the South. Number two, the Confederacy was fighting from a defensive position, which meant that they knew their territory very well. And they had a reason to fight. They had better supply lines because they were in their area. They were in the South. Soldiers fought harder for their own homes. They had a reason to fight, like I mentioned before. Soldiers also knew the way of the land. Okay, going to your notes. Make sure you have some things down here, please, for the advantages and disadvantages. One more thing, just go over it one more time. Advantages of the Union. They had they had better supply lines, better factories. They had more railroads. They had more men and more naval power, more ships. Disadvantages: they didn't know the way of the land. They fought a lot in the South. They really didn't have a reason to fight. They were kind of like, oh, we're going to win this thing anyway, so let's just get this thing over with. They thought the Civil War was going to end in days or weeks, maybe a couple months at the most. They didn't think it was ever going to last for 4.5 years. Okay, Confederate advantages and disadvantages. Advantages: number one, they had a reason to fight. Number two, they had better leaders. Number three, they fought on their own soil, so they knew where they were going often, and could get equipment fast to where they needed to get it to. The Confederate disadvantages were: number one, they didn't have a lot of men. They didn't have a lot of enlistees. They were kind of unorganized in the beginning. They didn't have uniforms. They had money issues. They didn't have a lot of factories. A lot of disadvantages for the South. Um, President of the Confederacy was elected Jefferson Davis, not a real U.S. president. He was the president of the Confederacy. I'm going to go over the war strategy in another slide, so if you want to leave that blank, you may. Going over to the North, the president of the Union was not only then the 16th president, Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln is our 16th president of our great land. He's also the president of the Union, as you are well aware, and also the starter of the Republican Party, which is an anti-slavery party. Okay, watch this video, please. It's only like 4 minutes. It kind of gives a real good overview of the Civil War with the causes and some of the battles and the end result as well. I think it's a really good video to watch to kind of get you a head start on this unit. Please upload this slide on Thursday, April 16th. This is the Civil War, the United States, what it looked like before secession, that's 1859, and after secession. So if you look real quick on these maps, this is what the United States looked like before the secession, before the war started. You can see that the United States was united. They were kind of, I want to say united totally, but states did not leave the country. They were not leaving the Union. They were not leaving the federal government. They were still part of the United States. However, if you fast forward after, Fort Sumter, this is what the United States looked like after secession, after Abraham Lincoln got elected. So as you can tell from these dates over here, South Carolina left first. You can see Texas was February 1st, 1861. Look at all of these dates over here. They're almost right after another. January 9th, January 10th, January 11th, all the way down to North Carolina leaving in 1861, May 20th. Now the border states I'm going to go over here in a second. So just keep that in mind. That's going to be Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and Delaware. I'm going to go over those here in a second, as well as West Virginia and Virginia. So that I need this map. Just copy it, screenshot it, whatever you want to do, and put it in your slides right here, please. Okay, going down. Look at the bar graph real quick. The bar graph, you can obviously tell, list the advantages up here the North had. Well, they had more population, more people. They had more bank deposits. In other words, they had more money. They had more factories. They had more food crops. They had more horses. And they had more railroad tracks. You can list all of that up here. Now, the South, there's only two things. Number one, they had donkeys and mules, which were better on rougher terrain, mountainous areas, and also cotton. Now you're like, why is cotton important? Well, cotton is important because they could use the cotton to hopefully use it as a way to recruit European nations to join the South in this battle, in this war. But that never happened, just to let you know. Based on this graph alone, which side do you think will win? Obviously, the North. So write real big letters, the North. Okay, border states. I'm going to go back to the after secession and kind of go over the border states with you real quick. The 4 border states were Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and also Delaware. And the reason why those border states were really, really important was number one, they were slave states that bordered slave states and where slavery was illegal. They were both important to the North and to the South because of their strategic locations. So just keep that in mind. A lot of the battles happened in those areas. Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, Delaware. A lot of those battles and a lot of violence took place in those areas. After Virginia seceded, just to let you know, this is where we get West Virginia. Western counties in Virginia broke away, and they rejoined the Union as a state. So let me hyphenate that real quick. There we go. Or there we go. As a new state of called West Virginia. So West Virginia had a bunch of abolitionists there. They eventually left Virginia and applied for statehood with the federal government and became their own state. So West Virginia was part of the Union, not part of the South. Their neighboring state, Virginia, was a slave state. 24 states made up the Union, and 11 joined the Confederacy. Now, these border states, eventually seceded after the Civil War started, but they didn't secede before the Civil War started, like a lot of those other states did. So, going back to your notes, insert a picture, please, of the border states. You can grab it from those notes if you want to, make it easy. Insert a map of Virginia before the Civil War and a picture of Virginia after the Civil War. You should have a picture of West Virginia on this one over here. Border states, again, we already went over the notes on this side, so just keep those in mind. Railroads, real quick, 1860. Which side had more railroads? Well, just by looking, you can see all the lines. The lines here are representing railroad tracks. You can see that there is a lot more railroad lines in the north. That's a good thing for the north, but a lot of the battles didn't happen there. So just keep that in mind that it was easier to get equipment, though, and supply lines in the north. But once they went south, it was a lot harder to get around there. A lot of them took boats, as a matter of fact, around Florida up to the Mississippi River, and that's how they ended up getting into Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia. That's where a lot of those battles took place as a result of boats, Union boats, the ironclads going down underneath Florida. How might railroads be an advantage in the war? Well, obviously supply lines. You can get men quicker to where they need to get to. You can get also supplies quicker as well. Okay, this is a real quick section just to kind of give you an outline of who is in charge. The North or the South. Who had most, let me scroll this over here, who had most, almost doubled the railroad mileage? Well, obviously the North, so just take this box right here and place it somewhere in the North, just like that. Who had 85% of the factories? Well, obviously the North. Who had approximately 22 million people? Obviously the North. Who had 9 million people and how many, however, 3.5 million of them were slaves? Well, obviously the South. You can put that down here. And who had almost all the naval power and shipyards? That would be the North. So you can put that somewhere. I don't know where to put that. Obviously, I can just put it over here, I guess. Just like that. Okay, good enough. I want you to know that the North had all of the advantages for the most part. Just keep that in mind. Please make sure that you get that slide done. Okay, going on to, we got that done. We got the railroads done. We got the strengths and weaknesses of the North and the South done. Okay, real quick, two more little things. Is looking at these, comparing the resources. This is the resource slide. What benefits did the North have going into the war? Well, they had more workers, they had more factories. It's kind of a repeat, but just put a couple little things there. They had more factories, they had more guns, they had more textiles, they had more cloth, they had more, they had ways to make uniforms. Value of goods produced. Obviously, the factories produced a lot more money. For the North, they had a lot more money. So just please make sure that you get that number one done. Number two, what advantages does having more workers give during a war? Well, obviously people are working. People are getting supply lines, are getting guns, are getting ammunition. They're being resupplied. Which side had more firearms? Obviously the North. Guys, the advantages were at the North. And I want to emphasize that because you're about to see something that's going to turn here in probably the next couple days. And the last thing I want you to do is the men available for duty in the Civil War. Which side had more men that could serve for their side of the war? Which years did which side had more men that could serve for their side of the war? Well, obviously the North. Which years did the South have fewer people available to fight in the Civil War? And then when did the Civil War start and when did it end? So real quick, just from this graphic, just put one or two little answers here and boom, you are done with that slide. Okay, on Friday we're going to go over the leaders one more time and kind of go over the generals as well too, and as well as the leaders of the Confederacy and the generals of the Confederacy as well. These are actual, as you are well aware, real pictures as well. Please make sure you know Robert E. Lee and Ulysses S. Grant. And then we're going to get into the war erupting and getting into the battles, starting with after we go over the strategy, starting with the Battle of Bull Run. We're going to get into that as well as soon as possible. Okay, guys, that's all I have for you. I know this was long. Hopefully you got something from it. All I want you to do is just submit those 2 slides. This slide right here, the border states, the states before secession, the states after secession map, as well as the comparing the Union and Confederacy. That's all you need to submit for Thursday. All right, guys, talk to you soon. See you at the Hangouts.